Hey guys, this is Matthew from Nerd News Today, and we're back with another Warhammer 40k painting video. Now this is continuing my look at the Warhammer 40k Intercessors paint set, and in the last video I decided to give it a shot doing some edge highlighting for the painting. This time around I'm going to go back to what I did for my very first model, which was the dry brush technique to get kind of a softer look across the figure, and that's what I'm going to try and work on again today. This is mainly following some guidelines from Sonic Sledgehammer Studios, which has been a very great channel, very helpful for me as a beginner to try and figure out what the heck it is I'm doing with these models. But I think the main goal for this miniature here is to just practice the dry brush technique and try and refine that a little bit more. I really liked how it looked the last time, even though it wasn't the greatest looking miniature, obviously, especially being a first try. But I did like how it came out, and I want to keep going with that look. So I think the best thing to do is just keep practicing and try it again. So again, here is my guy. This one also is special because, as you can see, he's not wearing a helmet. He is actually, he's got a face, and he'll be my very first attempt at painting a face on these things, which I expect to go extremely poorly. He's already cleaned up. Next step is going to be getting him primed, and then from there I'm going to begin starting to put down my paints, and hopefully this thing is going to work out well for me. So let's go ahead, get primed, get started. See you in a second. So step one, I'm using some Imperial Primer and my base brush to go ahead and prime this guy by hand. Of course, the hardest part about priming is getting all those little crevices in there, and there's a lot of crevices on these Ultramarines. So now with the primer dry, I'm going to go ahead and take my Macragge Blue and do our first coat of that on him. So now this Ultramarine is all dry with his base layer of Macragge Blue. The next step now, following again the Sonic Sledgehammer Studio tutorial that you can find on his YouTube page, I'm going to go ahead and cover my Ultramarine in a shade of some Drakenhof Nightshade, and I'm going to be using my medium shade brush over here. So the whole model is going to get coated, and once that dries, I'm going to go ahead and start highlighting it. Now his tutorial is said to be pretty generous with the shade, and that's what I've been doing here, is making sure that every little nook and cranny, that's going to be our word of the day, is filled up. However, of course, you do want to move around any big splotches. So if you have any big splotches around there, just use your brush, move around those big wet areas, and help continue covering all the spots that got missed. Alright, so it's been about an hour now, and my little Ultramarine has dried now with the shade. So the next step is going to be to start bringing some of the color back into him, since he's quite dark at the moment. And so to do that, we're going to use some Cronus Blue, and I'm going to use my small dry brush to basically do a little highlight all across the guy. So what I'm going to do first, of course, is put some of this Cronus Blue onto my dry brush, wipe it off really heavily onto a paper towel so I get just the bare minimum amount of paint on the brush, and then I'm just going to kind of come along and do a little bit of that across all the figure. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and let's see how it turns out, because last time this is where my mistakes began to happen, mostly because I couldn't see what the heck I was doing. This time, with this camera set up in a different position and not blocking my line of view, I definitely have a little bit more free range movement now. So we're going to go ahead and get started and see how that turns out. So I'm all done with the Cronus Blue now, and the next step is going to be to hit it with some Ethereum Blue to get some of the highlights in some of the little areas, like on basically the spots where light is going to hit him the most. So on the top of the backpack here, on the shoulder pads, on the rim of his armor. We're just going to hit basically the parts that the light's going to hit the most and will probably shine the most on. So let's go ahead, clean off my shade brush, and do that one more time. Alright, so the Cronus Blue highlights are dry. Next step is I'm going to go ahead, go back to using my small dry brush here. And we're going to go ahead and put on some Ethereum Blue onto some of the highlighted parts, which will be things like the top of his shoulder blades, on parts of his chest armor, the top of the knee pads, basically any place where sun is going to hit it the most, or light, wherever it's going to be, most likely being Warhammer times. Sun don't shine too much. So wherever light is going to hit certain spots, we're going to highlight that with some Ethereum Blue. Same technique as last time, which is I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush into there and just go ahead and get it down so that it's just kind of on the bristles very lightly, and then just dust it. Unfortunately, my Ethereum blue it's a little bit old, and it's looking a little gross, so I'm going to go ahead and mix that. Maybe it's time to buy a new thing of Ethereum blue. And here's the Ultramarine now with the Cronus Blue and Ethereum Blue highlights all done. And while it's not anything worthy of a golden demon, it's definitely an improvement over the very first model I did doing the dry brush technique. It's a little bit more subtle. Last time, if you guys remember watching the first video, I had a giant problem where I just globbed it on real badly. This time it's definitely more subtle. I was almost worried it was too subtle, so I did a second pass off camera. But I think from a distance it actually looks pretty decent. So next step is I'm going to start detailing some of the armor and his gun. I'm going to use some Abaddon Black on the gun for most of the body of the gun. Then I'm going to go ahead and use some lead belcher on some of the metallic parts, and I'm also going to use it as a base coat for the chest emblem and for the parts on the shoulder pauldrons. Then I'm going to highlight those parts with Rune Fang steel. And then for the gold parts, what I do have is, it's behind our Ultramarine, a little pot of the Retributor armor, and I'm going to use this Gehenna's gold to get some really nice highlights on top of that gold. So it's going to look really nice and bright. So unlike the first model I did, this time I've got this little guy down here, which I'm going to deal with later. I haven't quite figured out what to do with that yet, but I'm going to go ahead and at least do the parts that I know, and then we're going to do the unfamiliar parts. And yes, soon enough, we're going to get to the face and how that's going to all work out. That's going to be a disaster. Alright, so stick around, here we go. One thing I have learned while doing this is don't be afraid to flip the model upside down, because sometimes you're not going to be able to reach those spots otherwise. So best thing to do, flip it upside down. Don't worry about the orientation for now, because no one needs to know that you gave this guy a bit of a headache in order to paint him the right way. All the black parts are now ready, which are mostly on his back side there. So the next step again, as I mentioned, we're going to go ahead and start to silver him up a little bit. And that's going to be the pauldrons and the centerpiece on his chest and the wings. I'm going to make those silver as well as parts of the gun, and then when that's dry I'm going to go ahead and highlight most of the silvery parts with Rune Fang steel. And again, once the pauldrons have dried, I'm going to go ahead and make them gold, which will be a mixture of first using Retributor armor and then putting some Gehenna's gold for highlights. So it turns out this whole time this was actually Balthazar gold, so we're not going to use that because I prefer the look of Retributor armor. So I'm going to go ahead, hit up with some Retributor armor, and then go ahead and do the Gehenna's gold. So what I did here differently from the last model I did, which was the whole gold issue, was that I used Balthazar gold. Since the Gehenna's gold is a little bit more of a reddish tone, I'm lighting that up with some water, so it's about half water, half paint. And I'm using it to kind of layer on top of it to add sort of a shine to it. I'm definitely making a mess here, but I'm going to go ahead and fix it up a little bit later on. So I've got all the gold now, I've got all the silver ready, but I've decided I don't really like how the blue is looking. I think it still just looks a little too subtle. So I'm going to go ahead and try and maybe use either some Alatok blue, maybe put some Macragge blue on, again, just to kind of clean up some things further. I wanted to look a little bit more brighter, I guess. Like here's the one I did originally that was dry brushed, and you can see it's a lot brighter. That's also one I did mess up, but there's a lot more of the Ethereum blue on there, more of the Cronus blue highlights. I feel like that's missing currently. Even though it's there, it's just so much more subtle. So I'm going to see what I can do to brighten him up without making him look as chalky as this first one looked. So, BRB. So the Alatok blue seems to be kind of deepening the darker colors, so that means I'm going to have to go back and use the Cronus and the Ethereum blue. So all the gold and silver parts are done, and I also cleaned up the blue, and it's a little bit brighter now. I think you guys can tell on camera it looks a little bit better. So the next step now is dealing with the face, and this is my first time doing a face. So looking at Sonic Sledgehammer, what he did in his How I Paint Things Easy Ultramarines video was he just took some Bugman's Glow and kind of did a wash of that. That was the first step, so I'm going to do that. I think it'll be the first thing I do. And then I also have a pot of Cadian Flesh Tone, so I might be adventurous and try maybe do a little bit of layering, or maybe a bit of dry brush with that. Now, the Ultramarine that he paints has a bald head, my guy has hair, and I have a pot of Mornfang Brown, so that might be what I use to do the hair. And ultimately, once it's all done, I think the next step is just Agrax earth shading all of it, and well, we'll see how this all works. Now, I'm probably not going to do this one on camera, because it's going to require a lot of very tight work, so you'll have to just take my word for it, and I'll let you know how it goes once we're done, which you'll see in like a few seconds. Of course, very quickly I realized that I probably should have done a sub-assembly with the head, but too late now. We're going to have to just go with it, lesson learned. And there's layer 1, and now we're going to go back and do a second layer just to make sure every spot is cleaned up. And with 2 layers now of Bugman's flesh on him, I'm going to go ahead, try out this Mornfang Brown for the hair. And I think for highlights, I might try some Rhinox hide, or maybe I'll water down some more of the reddish stuff. I'll make him a bit of a dirty redhead, maybe. So he also has some little metal bits in the back of his head. To make my life easier, I'm just going to go ahead and lead belcher that once the hair is all done. And since I have the Mornfang Brown out, I think I'm going to do the holster of his pistol in that color as well. Every paint behaves differently, and it looks like the Mornfang Brown is going to be one of those paints that requires a few layers just to get a nice even coat on it. So good to learn that now. It took about the same as well to do the hair. So typically colors that kind of have those certain hues of red, they do tend to take a little bit more than one coat, whereas other things that have reds in them will tend to be one giant glop. But again, Mornfang Brown, for whatever reason, it's going to need a little bit extra work, so just something for me to remember and something for you to be on the lookout for as well. So the Bugman's Glow is dry and the Mornfang Brown is dry, and I also went ahead and put some brown onto his pouches there and his pistol holder, and I also kind of decided to just experiment a little, and I used the Bugman's Flesh Glow, whatever the heck, to do a little bit of edge highlighting on those pouches and pistol holders just to see how it looked. And I think it actually looked pretty good. It actually came out looking pretty nice, so I'm happy with that. So the next step now, according to our good friend at Sonic Sledgehammer Studio, is we're going to go ahead and hit the face up with some Reichland Flesh Shade, and he also suggested putting on some of that Flesh Shade on the gold bits as well. So I'm going to give that a try, and once that's done, then we're going to start to highlight the face. I also decided to experiment by using the Reichland Flesh Shade on the pouches too, just to see what would happen. So the Reichland Flesh Shade is now all dried up, and the next step will be adding those highlights, which will be the Cadian Flesh Tone. And once I get through with that, I'm also going to go ahead and use the Nuln Oil to start making some of the metallic parts, such as the scope and the barrel of his gun look a little bit shiny, and some other parts as well to add some shine to them. So for me, this step ended up becoming more of like a dry brush technique. After the first blob went on, I realized my brush, even as small as it was, I had to be more careful with it. So I just decided to kind of work it around and try to use it more effectively in the dry brush technique, which really just meant going over very lightly over the features that were popping out of his face the most, such as the cheekbones and his lips and his nose. So what I'm doing with the Nuln Oil too, and what I'm trying to do with the shades in general, is not just blob them down, but to kind of move them around once they're on the model. This way I don't need to dip as much back into it, and I'm also making sure there's no recesses that'll be covered way too thickly with this stuff. And yes, I am going straight out of the pot, but this technique seems to have worked alright so far. And yes, I'm going out of the pot directly onto my model, which is probably not recommended, but I feel like with the shaders, it's probably okay. As long as everything is dry, I don't think it should really be a big problem. Of course, would have been a lot smarter if I used my larger layer brush to begin with, but problem solved. And of course, making sure not to miss the pistol and those little silvery bits I painted on the backpack earlier as well. Nor do you want to miss the silver stuff I did in the back of his head, even though no one's going to really see it except for, well, basically me and you guys, but I like to be thorough when I can. Okay, so highlights are done. Face is not too bad. Now, in Sonic Sledgehammer Studios' video, he had some Kislev flesh on top of the Cadian flesh tone to add even more highlight. I don't have that, so I'm going to skip that step this time around. Also because it is pretty difficult to actually paint this guy with, well, this little thing blocking his face and how his head is turned because he's looking at what he's pointing, I guess. So I'm going to skip that. I'm going to move on now to putting some Stormhost silver onto the metallic bits to make them pop a little bit more, and I'll also probably add some highlight onto the gun like I did in my first model. Now, another detail I have to work on also is this little bizarre guy over here, as well as his neglected helmet, which is off to his side. Now, that's going to be a bit of a problem because his gun is covering it. Again, that probably would have been something better to paint sub-assembly, but since I can't do that now, I'm just going to make the best of it. And since it doesn't need to have his eyes lit up, that's going to also be a little bit of a time saver. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that off camera and show you how it looks once that's ready. Alright, so he's looking pretty decent at this point, and the next step now is going to be dealing with his purity seal, which I'm no stranger to, did that with one of my other models as well. So we're going to start out with Xandri Dust as the base, and then Ushabti Bone for highlights, and I've got some, let's see, I think Astaroth Red is what I used last time, so it'll probably be that, and something else I'll figure out as I go along. So let's go ahead and get that one started. Quick correction for that, we'll actually be using Mephiston Red for the base of the Purity Seal, the wax part, and then we'll be using Astaroth Red for the highlights. I also decided to use Xandri Dust on the inside of that thing on his leg. And here comes the Astaroth Red for the highlights on the seal. Now once that's all dried, I'm going to go ahead and hit that up with a wash of Agrax Earthshade to tie it all together. And once again, notice how I'm pushing the Earthshade along so that doesn't just clump in one area. So with the majority of the painting now done, it's time for me to go ahead and use some Armageddon Dust to base this guy. And what I'm going to use for that is what I was using earlier to mix my paint, which is just a part of a chopstick. And I took a needle nose plier, trimmed a bit of the part of it off to have a cleaner, flatter side to use. I'm going to probably just clomp it onto there and base it, and I might also end up using the back of a brush perhaps to help spread it around and get into some of the tighter spots. I ended up switching out for a toothpick instead since the chopstick holder was a little too big. Now I'm making a bit of a mess on the guy's foot. I might try and peel it off once it's all dry, but on the other hand, it's not so bad. I kind of like that he looks a little bit muddy and like he's been in the dirt. He's seen some stuff. Alright, so the base of Armageddon Dust is now dry, and I've decided to do some more stuff for the base. I was checking out Sonic Sledgehammer Studios' video, which is called How I Paint Things Basing, and he had a few different techniques. I'm going to try one of them here, and that's just going to be to paint this guy up a little bit more. So first step, I'm going to take some Rhinox hide, and I'm going to water this down very heavily so that it acts almost as a shade. That's going to be the first layer on top of it. Then we're going to follow it up with a highlighted layer for a midtone of Mornfang Brown, which will be watered down probably a little bit. And then finally, to really highlight the brights of the area, I'm going to use Xandri Dust, I think, and that should really make the parts kind of pop out a little more. And to be fair, it actually does look pretty decent right now as is, but I figure why not experiment, because we're here to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'll let you know how it goes. So at this point, I'd say everything is pretty much done in terms of painting, or at least as far as I can take it. I do wish I had some Kislev flesh to, well, finish fleshing him out in terms of the facial area. But since I don't have it, I'm not going to really worry too much about it, and I'll just take care of that for the next one as I do. So at this point, with the base all done, I've touched up a few other spots that had some messes. I did some more detail work on the gun, and just general cleanup. I think at this point, I'm at a spot where I'm happy with it, or at least happy enough that I can call it a day. So what I'm going to do next is go ahead and put some matte varnish on it, and that's going to be my signal to say this guy is done. So I've watered down the matte varnish, and I'm just going to go ahead and start painting it on. It's going to look extremely messy, but that's kind of how it looks when it's in this phase, like you're just pouring glue all over this guy. So there you go, folks. That's a look at my second ever Warhammer 40k mini. And here's what it looks like. He's all done, he's all dried. And I'm going to put down next to him my first model, so you can kind of compare and contrast how the two look together. So the biggest difference for sure is just the amount of highlighting that was done. This one over here is a lot more natural, whereas this one here, it's a lot of brighter stuff going on in there. And has more of a weathered look, which was unintentional, but I kind of liked. I do kind of wish I had some more of that weathered look in this one too, but I guess from a distance it actually looks alright too. I guess both are probably fine, but this one is definitely more natural looking. I also really like the base, the fact that I actually based it this time too. It makes a big difference. It really just adds a lot more to the story of the character. And let me show you the back of him as well, so you can see what's going on there. I mean, the gun, pretty much nothing changed from the first model to the second one. I guess the biggest difference from behind will just be the fact that I painted in this holster, and I actually like that. It looks pretty cool. I also made these bits silver now as opposed to here. I just left them blue. So I think overall it's definitely a better job. I'm not entirely satisfied with the face that I did, but for a first time face, and since I am probably missing a shade or two to make it look really good, I'd say it's pretty decent. So yeah, overall, pretty satisfied with it. There's definitely a lot more work to do, of course, to improve. But for where I'm going and how many I've done so far, I'd say it's pretty decent. But the important question now is, what do you guys think? So you guys saw most of the process. What do you think about what I did, what went right, what did I do wrong, and what could I have done better? If you guys have any opinions or suggestions, let me know in the comments below. So until then, this is Matthew from Nerd News Today, and that is my second Warhammer 40k miniature. We'll see you guys next time with some more painting. See you then. Hey, one quick word before I go completely. So here's a look at all three that I've done so far, just so you can see all the progress side by side. They're all very different. I've learned a lot of techniques and how to solve a lot of problems as I've gone along through this process. But I think it's time for me to move on from the blue Smurfs and do something a little bit different, since I've kind of had enough of the blue. And also, I need to figure out what's up with those globby blue paints I've got. Maybe I need to buy some new paints. Lucky me. So the question is, what am I going to do next? Well, how about I show you? Yep, that's right. Next up, we've got some Blood Angels. So stay tuned. I've got this pack of Blood Angels Tactical Squad guys. There's 10 of them in this box. I'm going to break out all my reds, and we're going to have a lot of fun painting some Blood Angels. So stick around. Plenty more Warhammer 40k painting to come. So until then, I'm Matthew from Nerd News Today. Those are my Smurfs, and get ready, because we're about to get a little bloody the next time around. See you then. Thanks for watching.